participation in this. And we are recording the meeting, as you probably just got notified about, so that people can have access to it later. I'm really excited about this opportunity to hear from you all and really be a community of practice as it comes to being a values-based employer and all of that entails with making our workplaces really wonderful places to work. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump into a presentation here. I've got a few slides, and that's going to just kind of set up our time to then have a conversation. And if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat area. We'd love to know who's attending and where you are. And so at this point, I just want to make sure, can everybody see my screen and the slides that are, okay, Deborah, you're nodding, great. So as Deborah said, and thanks for that long intro, Deborah, I blushed a little bit. It was maybe a little too long. It was great. Thank you. But I founded Spur because I saw so many supervisor team member relationships go awry. At our core, right, we all want to attract and hire and then develop and retain wonderful people in our organizations at the highest possible level, but it's harder and harder to do effectively, it seems. And wages are a big part of that. We'll get into that a little bit, but there's so many things outside of that as well that are really, really important for retaining workers. As Deborah said, my sweet spot is really small business. I like to work directly with owners. It's really enjoyable for me to see all the variety of things that business owners are doing in our community and engage in all of those things. I like to engage with managers and really anyone who considers themselves a supervisor. And I think that would probably include everybody on this call today. And in particular, supervisors of people who are stressed out. And unfortunately, that's more and more people these days. I had an aha moment with Spur when I realized that supervisors, there's not a lot of development going on. They're selected and sent off, and usually because they're great performers. And that can also make it more challenging, because if you're a great performer, sometimes you don't understand why other people aren't performing at the level that you possibly could. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one of them is during the financial crisis, a lot of supervisor training and coaching development budgets got slashed. Instead, there was a shift to compliance because we really want to avoid lawsuits. But that's led to a bit of a crisis of trust, I think, between employees and employers. We have a lot of 1099 employees now. There's just been eroded trust over time in the employee-employer relationship. And so I coach these leaders so those relationships can improve and trust can be restored. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to dive in here. So, like Deborah said, this is a 3-workshop series. There's the one today on being an awesome boss. September 23rd, we're talking specifically about healthcare and ways that you can maximize the value of health benefits. And then on November 4th, we're going to get into financial wellness, since that's such an important topic these days. So that's our 3-session series. In the next hour, we're just going to walk through 4 parts. So first, I want to just define our current challenge as owners and as leaders, and then frame the session within that challenge or within that specific challenge. And then I'd like to open it up to all of us to have a discussion about what does the best boss look like? I think that's really important for us to glean information from everybody. And then I've got some resources and tools on the table. So first, the first part of the challenge is that many of us cannot make ends meet. This graph is a graph of housing sales prices compared to median income. And you can see that median income, the blue line here, remains relatively flat for the last 35 years. And housing sales prices have skyrocketed. This isn't new information. We all recognize this, but this is sort of a microcosm of what's happening. The cost of living is going up, and we have a shrinking middle class. We have a barbell economy where there's lots of high wage earners and lots of low wage earners and low wage earners, and there's fewer people in between. And so it's harder to make ends meet now than ever before. And the contribution to work to that is more and more difficult. I have a friend who likes to say compensation has gotten disconnected from well-being. And really what he means by that is that wages aren't getting us closer to being able to make ends meet. And so we need different sources of income. We need different sources of ways to manage this as individuals. For example, a job, used to be security, right? It used to be being able to afford a house, getting a defined benefit pension plan, and having health insurance. Those were the three aspects that were really strong. And now it's gone from being able to afford a good house to not being able to save for a house to not even being able to afford rent. From getting a defined benefit pension to, then it became defined contribution, to sometimes maybe not even being able to afford the 401k for the employer match, and then not even being able to save for at all. And this isn't just a problem at lower incomes. 69% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings. Let me say that again, 69% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings. That's the challenge that we're facing, is that there is a financial difficulty across the board in our country. The second part of this challenge is that earnings don't necessarily translate to better outcomes for people. And this is a graph of a team that I'm working with. This is called the cliff effect. And basically what this graph shows, it's a little complex, but what it shows is at different earnings levels running along the x-axis. So as you earn more from $0 to $64,000 in this graph, your net household resources actually change in ways that are unexpected and not necessarily helpful, depending on your household type. And so this example has two different types of households, either two kids without housing assistance or two kids with housing assistance. And I want to just focus on that last one. You can see that in this reddish purplish plot, the net household resources hit a maximum at $20,000 of income because of public assistance and benefits available to this type of household. And if they have housing assistance, as you earn more money after you hit that $20,000 mark, you actually have less net resources when you factor in benefits assistance that you receive and the loss of those benefits at those increased income levels, and also tax changes. So the earned income tax credit, things like that. So you don't actually get back to where you were at $20,000 until you hit somewhere around $54,000. This is really concerning. It's actually gotten a lot better in Colorado. We have a great team at the Department of Human Services that's working through this, but this still exists, and it's a huge challenge. And so this is part of our challenge, is that you may have behavior from employees that doesn't necessarily make sense on the surface. They may reject raises. You have employees finding informal income sources and doing other things to rationally act and maximize the resources for their household. The second part of this is that as a nation, we're stressed out. That's not news, right? But I just wanted to highlight the vast increase. This is data from the CDC, and we see that since COVID, there's been a nearly fourfold increase in US adults reporting symptoms of anxiety or depression. There are people on this call that are reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression. It's a natural part of handling COVID. We all have experienced difficulty probably during this time, many of us in really hard ways with family members and friends. And so people are recognizing that they're reprioritizing in part because of this stress. And people have the motive thinking that, you know what, purpose matters more than anything right now. And they don't just have the motive, but they also have the power, right? Because we have the tightest labor market in decades. both leading to quitting jobs, right? Job switching costs are less than maybe ever before. And there's more openings than people looking for jobs. And so it's entirely excusable to resign right now. It's not like, an employer is looking at a resume and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you just quit your last job. I'm not interested." We're pretty much interested in anybody. And we're willing to give anybody a chance and the benefit of the doubt because we need people. And that's really where this next part comes in, is that it's not just employees that are stressed out. We're all stressed out. Almost all leaders are too. This is a study that just came out this week from Deloitte, the CEO Top Priorities Survey, and 71% of companies said that they are undergoing or preparing for workforce and talent transformation in all its forms. So that could be a complete rework of job design. It could be looking at artificial intelligence and or digitizing roles or remote work. There's a wide variety that comes in there. But as one author put it, the war for talent has gone nuclear. And I think that resonates. CEOs are stressed because they're losing people and they can't find people. And so we have to address these underlying stressors if we're going to talk about retention, if we're going to talk about supporting employees, because that's really what this is about, is how do you effectively support employees when their wages have been disconnected and compensation has been disconnected from well-being and positive outcomes due to circumstances beyond employers' control, and how do you handle a talent crisis? And so how do we treat people well? That's really the question. And let's dive into stress just a little bit. The brain science tells us that anxiety really has to do with security and validation. And so the question in regard to employment is, am I going to be okay? Will this job help me be more okay or less okay? And people make that determination fairly quickly in their job. And I think that's why you see a lot of folks leaving jobs quickly, right? It's hard to fill new positions. It's much easier to keep an employee that's been around for a long time than keep an employee who's just started, because they're still trying to figure out, is this the right place for me? It makes sense. But as they ask this question, am I going to be okay? What they're asking is, will it provide financially? Will it provide fulfillment? Am I going to have dignity? And am I going to contribute? Those are the things that people are really interested in. And more than likely, you're attracting, you're hiring, you're developing, and you're trying to retain people who are already stressed, right? And this stress and these threats shift us right into fight, flight, freeze. That's not new information. We all know that, but I just want to apply that, into the employment arena here, because when we have our limbic system, which is our fast brain, Daniel Kahneman wrote a great book on thinking fast and slow. And the limbic system, also known as our lizard brain, it's the primitive part of our brain that just recognizes fear and pleasure. It's a dog wagging its tail, right? When it's pet, it's unconscious action. And then the neocortex is really what makes us human. It's the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's a slow process. And, the amygdala within the limbic system, it has one function. It's sensing danger and sounding the alarm. And when you're stressed out, your body is sensing that danger and sounding the alarm more often. And what happens is that we lose our human skills. When we're anxious, we communicate less often, we communicate less effectively, we get more offensive and more defensive with each other, and we forget things. We literally stop filing memories. Our problem solving is inhibited, and we're not able to digest new content. And so anxiety is really important because it tells us something important. It tells us things are uncertain, and it might tell us we're feeling exposed. And as managers, as owners, as leaders, we have to know that, first of all, the folks that we're interacting with may be experiencing this. And second of all, we may be experiencing it too. And experiencing that leads us to making decisions and behaving in ways that we wouldn't necessarily act, and would cause more harmful outcomes than if we were not stressed out, right? And so as a result, relationships get damaged. Psychological safety is harmed. You'll hear me talk about psychological safety a little more. And just the overview of psychological safety is, can I say what I mean and say it out loud and be heard without feeling like I'll have some kind of retaliation or concern or something at work that's going to be disruptive to my well-being if I really am honest. And this is a core concept that's being talked about all over the place. It's the root and the foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So many of you have probably been talking about this and hearing about it. And then ultimately, if that psychological safety is harmed, people check out and they quit. That's just the reality. I want to move into just talking about the fact that we have to frame this in some way, right? Because we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and I don't want to do that. What I want to do instead is focus on the fact that there are, at least 5, there's maybe more roles in terms of creating culture in an organization and in creating the employee experience. And if you think about it as, building a home or building a house and turning it into a home, really the key is that managers and frontline bosses have the greatest impact on employee experience. And I'll get to that in a second, because they're the ones inhabiting and warming the space and making that house a home. And so that's what is felt by employees more than anything else. So these other roles are really, really important. We just can't address those today in an hour-long session. And so, in our limited time today, this is the focus. I think there's a bit of a disconnect from the top, from the owner executive setting the foundation, down to the level of employees and what they experience over time. There's many, many studies on this that owners and executives feel like, oh yeah, the culture in my company is great. You ask the same thing of the employees, and it's exactly the opposite. It's almost the 80-20 rule. It's over 80% of owners and executives think their company culture is great and is exactly how they want it to be. And about 31% of employees feel the same way. So the problem is getting that culture down to the frontline employee. And so this is where I want to put the attention. And I want to just fill that out just a little bit. So why focus on bosses? The first reason is that there's a consensus developing that organizations are an accumulation of teams. Employees experience the culture of the organization primarily through their own team. There is more performance variability between teams in the same organization than there is between organizations. This research has been validated by ADP Research, Marcus Buckingham, Gallup, Clifton Strengths, the Wharton School, Burson, Deloitte. There's a consensus developing. It's actually better for you to work for a great boss in a terrible organization than it is to work for a bad boss in a great organization. You're going to actually have a better experience if you have that great boss. And along those lines, good bosses, right, increase employee engagement. Gallup found that 70% of the variability in employee engagement is explained by direct supervisors. Who is your direct supervisor? That combination of care, support, interest, energy level, and challenge is the thing that's really going to change the employee experience. And yet we find that less than 30% of people are called on to bring their own initiative and originality to work. And you've probably heard so much about the Gallup employee engagement studies and how engagement is very, very low and could be better. And SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, has declared that there's only 40% of employees would say that they have a good relationship with their boss. 40%, so less than half. So there's a failure of relationship leading to a failure of engagement with employees. And as a result, that leads to people quitting. The old adage, people quit bosses, not jobs. I think that's, you can argue that, but at the end of the day, bosses have so much control over the reasons why people quit. So sometimes they quit because of their boss directly, and sometimes they quit because of the way the boss has set up their job, because of a job design that doesn't meet the needs of meaningfulness and autonomy and variety and support. So that's what we're facing. And bosses really are the people that carry and embody company culture and values to the team. With that, I want to pause there, and I want to just see if anybody has a reaction to anything I've shared so far, anything that didn't ring true, anything that doesn't speak to your experience, or anything that does. I just want to open that up, and then as you see on screen, we'll get to this. We'll get to this next slide. I'll stop sharing while I just ask for some input from folks, and feel free to just include in the chat too. Deborah's monitoring that chat, but would love to hear some other voices.
Dan, this is Bridget from Bridgets Botanicals. I was curious, so I definitely am hearing all the things that you're saying, and I'm the founder, and I don't have any bosses or like managers under me, but I just have a couple of direct employees. They are 1099s because I can't have a full-time employee quite yet. But just in terms of thinking about being a good manager and good boss as also the founder for a very small team, I know that that's one of the big struggles that I have, is like still creating that culture while maintaining all of the other responsibilities that I have of like running kind of the whole show, and then just kind of saying, okay, where can certain areas become easier because I have somebody who can help out in like this sector or in this sector. So I'm just curious, speaking to like founders or maybe some of the business owners here who may not have managers, but they are the acting manager, if you will. What might be a good strategy, I guess, for looking at those kinds of factors for kind of keeping that employee wellness without getting stressed? Because I know I've definitely been there before. And looking at some of the graphics that you just showed, it's like a lot of my employees, they're like, oh, but I have unemployment, so I don't need to work more, or I don't want to work more. And like, why should I work more for you when they have that? And or looking at the, I don't know, like creating the space. Like I have kind of a crappy space right now. I don't have like a nice space that they can go into and feel like, oh, this is so beautiful and lovely. Just, because of, I'm not there yet as a business. So those are just some thoughts coming to me, and then curious on your thoughts around that.
That's a lot. And yeah, I appreciate those thoughts, Bridget. As you're talking, I think it's absolutely true. And I mean, I think all of us as founders, we can feel the stress, right? Of, oh my gosh, I've got 100 things to do. How do I possibly prioritize? And then you want me to engage further with people who really, I just need them to, GSD, get stuff done, right? and they don't want to work more, so I've got to make sure I give them the right tasks, and it's a real challenge. As far as space goes, what I found about space, we all love the founder story of like working out of your garage, or like just those the kind of those miracle stories. And I think, well, I don't want to say too much yet. I think this is actually probably a good segue into our conversation about best bosses. But before we do that, Debbie is raising her hand, and I want to give her the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, Bridget. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie McHugh. I'm the Chief of Staff at Grasslands. We are a 24-person PR and marketing agency here in Denver. Bridget, I feel your pain. It's something I've been thinking a lot about on different ways I can sort of surprise and delight my team and motivate them besides like giving them a paycheck. And also just having that time to do it. So one thing I've started to do just this past week was I was at the gym and I said to the gym owner who's across the street from our office, hey, what can I do what could I offer my employees? A free week at the gym? I really want to have a culture of where people can take walks on the treadmill for their meetings instead of just, being on Zoom together or something like that. We do a lot of walking meetings anyway, but I'm like, this is a way for them to just de-stress and it's free. So, I asked him, I had a great conversation with this gym owner. He's like, absolutely, Debbie, I'll give everybody a free week. And then if anybody wants to join, I'll give them a heavily discount of $30 a month. And so those are things I'm doing. Like while I'm already at the gym, I'm engaging and I'm saying to the barista, hey, what could you do for me? Give me a discount so I can surprise and delight my team by leaving them, free coffee now and then. And I find that trying to create an environment where it's like, ooh, what are we going to get this month? And I'm not going to tell them I'm doing it monthly so that I'm held accountable to monthly if I can't pull it together. But I already have like 2 of these little surprise and delight things kind of lined up for my team. So again, that's just something small that I'm doing that I hope will have a big impact. And last thing I'll say is we have an absolutely beautiful office. We have an absolutely beautiful space. It doesn't matter. People don't want to come into the office. So I wouldn't let that be a reason to hold you back. I mean, certainly some people come in, but we, with COVID, are allowing people, whatever you're most comfortable. And so it's like usually me and like 2 other people's in this beautiful, gorgeous office. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents of a practical thing that I've been trying to do for my team.
Thank you.
I love that, Debbie. Thank you so much. Along those lines, I think it would just be great that's a great segue to jump into this next question that I have. And this next question is, who is the best boss you've ever had? And as you think about that person, I don't want you just to share who that person is, but what were the characteristics of that boss that made them the best boss? This is probably something we've thought about before, probably, had conversations about this, but I think it's really, really important to develop consensus on this and really understand what are the things, the attitudes, I call them the ABCs, attitudes, behaviors, and character traits that really add up to being a great boss. So let's just take some time, and I would love to hear, Debbie, it sounds like surprising and delighting. I love that language. That's something that I would definitely fit in that category of what good bosses do, right? Is surprise and delight in a way that's unexpected. That really keeps the energy positive and going. But what are some other things? I would love to hear from others.
Don't make me do all the talking, everybody. It's Debbie again. I'd say I really think authentic leadership really resonates when someone doesn't come in saying that they know everything. I always can appreciate a boss that's like, gosh, I have no idea what we're going to get. I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, you guys, but like I'm in it. I'm reading everything I can read about COVID or XYZ. Follow me along. So that idea of being just authentic and not having all the answers all the time, which I know sometimes is antithetical to what we've been taught. We should know everything. We should have the answers. It's like, says who? Like, how could we possibly have all the answers? So I found that when you're authentic, people really see that vulnerability and they open up the conversation for them to be vulnerable as well.
Debbie, do you have any particular, go ahead.
I was just going to say, flag that there's some great responses in the chat too. But yeah, go.
Yeah. Debbie, you also mentioned somebody that treats me as a partner. I love that idea. So there's a way that, being a boss is necessarily hierarchical, right? In terms of the flow of how things work in the organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person that you're managing is not a partner. Of course they are in getting the work done and delegating and then giving us freedom. And Mikey, if you would be willing to share and come on camera, I'd love to hear what you had to say about that. Clear goals for the team, and then giving us freedom in how to get there. That reminds me of a Stephen Covey classic approach called green and clean. You can Google it. There's a really cheesy, like 5-minute video on it, but it's got great content in terms of, as a boss, you either manage on results or manage on methods. And if you manage on both, people are going to get really angry really quick, because that's called micromanaging, right? But if you set the expectation that either you're going to manage it based on results only or methods only, then people at least know how you're going to manage them. But, and Mikey, if you could, yeah, share a little bit more about that. Would love to hear it. And maybe she's not in a place where she can do that. Yeah, I'm just reading through the other comments. Robin says, how can we build better communication between departments? Our teams have gotten really siloed, and emails or meetings aren't improving communication. I'm also interested in learning how to improve culture camaraderie without the forced fun activities. Yeah, does anybody have any comments on those two questions? Again, I want to open this up to the group. I don't want to be the one talking all the time.
I did a event last fall before COVID was like back up and big. But it was a pumpkin decorating thing, and it was kind of a social, everyone was invited for my contractors, but they could also bring a friend, or, it was very low key. And that one was helpful, because in the past it was like a required social event that we did once a month before COVID. And those ones, people sometimes showed up, but they also were like, oh, I have this thing, and would leave early. And then this event, everyone stayed, or most people stayed for like hours. And I was like, okay, I need to go to sleep. But so kind of like bring a friend, optional social type of thing instead of a required one. That worked for me. I only did it a couple of times though, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Bridget. Anyone else who would want to respond to Robin and her questions about either building better communication or improving culture and camaraderie without forced fun?
I'll say something really quick, and it's just a super simple thing that my manager came up with spontaneously. We had a back room where customers don't go, and she created this wall of positivity and put a Post-it note stack there, and the team members wrote little notes like, Hannah, you're rocking the mohawk today, or whatever. And they're just a Post-it size. And at first I thought, oh, nobody's going to do that. But it was always full, to the point where every time we had a staff meeting, I took them all down, I read them out. And I had team members who would look at that and go, oh, Jake hasn't had a note yet. I better write something to Jake, And so in my new space, I'm actually going to make a permanent, I'm going to have a wall of positivity in the back, labeled that, and people can add little notes to each other back there. And it's just turned into this fun thing that they all loved. And it wasn't like an event they had to attend or a forced thing. It was just, spontaneous.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, one of the ways that I respond to the communication between departments, I think it really depends on the size of the departments and in terms of how you communicate. But I think one of the things, as we, I showed that little table of the different roles, and communicating the why and understanding how each department is doing really different things, but the why is the same, right? And so what I would do in my teams is I would ask each of them to come up with ways that they're living out the values and working out the values of the organization, and then report that up and down through the organization so that different departments could see the same values being translated into the workplace in different ways by different departments. And that can help build a sense of camaraderie. Yeah, Debbie.
Well, Sorry, mute button problems. I've also, I've done things where I have, I've made sure that the various team members are like, anytime I have an interactivity, I'm always splitting up groups. I'm never allowing the groups to be sitting next to each other. Oftentimes, I'm also making sure that they're sitting down before we kick off a project and like, what's in it. I always think about what's in it for them. Like, what's in it for each group. Okay, what's in it for you is this is one of your company goals, or your bonus is attached to X, or that's what's in it for you. What's in it for you? What's in it for each group? And then you talk about the dependencies. Well, I'm dependent on this group to do the copy. And if the copy doesn't get done on time, then that means the graphic design team only has, 12 hours to get something done. And that doesn't reflect well on anybody, because at the end of the day, this is a project that we all are participating in. So I sometimes just break it down. What's in it for everybody, and what are the various dependencies? I'm depending on research. I'm depending on copy. I'm depending on sales, whatever that is, so that everybody understands the impact. If you miss this deadline, that means it's not giving these people enough time to do their job. I've found that when I really break it down and explain it and say, like, that means Susie isn't going to pick up her kids tonight. Like, you don't want to be responsible for Susie not picking up her kids. So do I put on a little guilt? Absolutely, I do.
That's good. I like that. How about, I'm seeing thank you, Debbie. I'm seeing some other comments in the chat, listening, right? Respectfully listening and handing over responsibility and trust. I think that goes in line with what we've been saying. It's really, really important once you release something to somebody else, not to take that back over or control it too much, right? Yeah, I've got a few more things here. For me, I'll just share. It's having a boss that believes the best about me, and even believing more than I do about myself at times in terms of my own capabilities. Their trust and an ability to believe that I can do something that I'm not sure I can. Has been a tremendous influence in me, for me in my work life. Advocacy, I think, is very important in a boss. So I had a boss who, wanted me to come on the work trips and wanted to make the investment, for me to go see a client. And I didn't necessarily think I was ready for that. That's one example, but advocating for, Dan, you're the person for this. That was huge for me, especially in my early career. Anything else that anybody would share? Okay, I'm going to move on. And the next thing I want us to talk about and reflect on is not just the best boss. And I put a quote up here by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Our chief want is someone who will inspire us to be what we know we could be. I think that's a good quote for bosses to keep in mind as they supervise their employees. The next question is different. It's, what did it cost your best boss to be your best boss? And I want us to talk a little bit about that. What are the costs of being a really good boss? I know you all have things to say. I'm trying to be a good listener. Okay, Debbie, thank you. So Debbie shared sleepless nights, worrying about people. Yeah, can you say a little more about that, Debbie? Do you mind coming on mic and saying more?
Sure. I think it is, I've noticed just a huge shift, and poor Jordan has heard me say this a million times, but mental health in people. And I think one thing is just worrying about them. Someone's cat's dying and you're worried about them because it's constant. And I think especially during the peak of COVID, when you couldn't see each other and you couldn't be together and you couldn't, give that person a hug or give them a high five. And so, for me personally, I did spend a lot of sleepless nights being like, are they going to be okay? Am I going to be able to retain them? Are they going to need to go home and live with their parents because they can't keep it together? Like, what does that look like? And obviously allowing a lot of flexibility for them at that time. And of course, take the time you need, et cetera. But it's exhausting. I mean, I have found it to be exhausting. I've had to do a lot of care for myself too, because it's hard to care for others when you yourself are depleted. So I think one of my biggest things for leaders is not only to just show up and be present for your team, but it's also to take the time to care for yourself, whether that means sleeping in or you taking a mental health day, because I think we have a lot on our shoulders. And I feel like we've had more on our shoulders because of this pandemic than we ever have before as leaders. And we're also in uncharted territory. So having groups like this to be able to lean on each other, I think is really important.
I couldn't agree more in stressing self-care as leaders. The damage is too great when we don't. And so caring for ourselves is caring for other people. I appreciate that thought. Thank you. Any others who want to contribute?
I always think about money when you say cost, of course. And I think about some of the bosses that I've had emotionally have been really available, and then also not as great leadership wise in other respects. And then other bosses who I feel like may have taken like a lot of time doing leadership classes, and they understand how to ask certain guiding questions, or maybe they have a background in coaching, or maybe they have an MBA. I always think about like how long, I always feel like old bosses have always been like pretty good because they've gone through a lot of experiences, and that has cost them a lot of like the time, but then also they probably have done training in it and becoming hopefully a supervisor or a manager or whoever they have become. So yeah, I always think about my time also as a leader and an entrepreneur, and then thinking about how can I use my background, but I don't have training specifically academically, like in an MBA, but I've ran my business for 7 years. And I know that there would be a difference if I were to spend more time or money on classes, or like, doing webinars like this, which are extremely helpful. So time or money, I feel like, are always big ones.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I was gonna-
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Tracy. I know you were trying to. I think we'll, sorry, Tracy, we are having a really difficult time hearing you because of your connection. So we do want your input, but it's really difficult to hear you. So I'm going to put you on mute, and we'll continue. But go ahead, please, if you can, put it in the chat, and we'll gladly hear your thoughts. Yeah, time, money, ego, right? I think a lot of time we don't realize that, our best bosses are actually people who may not get credit for things. And they may actually want you to get the credit for what they did. I had a boss actually that did that with me. And it was, again, it's another part of our advocacy, but we had worked so hard on a project together. He was a genius, and he put together this beautiful framework that then I kind of filled in. But when we met with the client, he gave me all the credit for it. And that really shocked me. And yet at the same time, it like really boosted my self-efficacy, right? Because I was like, wow, maybe maybe I did do this. And I mean, looking back on it, I'm like, oh, that's so silly. It really wasn't about that. It was about him deflecting praise back to me. And I think ego is one of those things where you can always find, if you have a boss who's too interested in their own ego, it's going to be a real barrier to them becoming a great boss. We've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to move on to resources here, because these resources have to do a lot with the conversation we've just been having. So I want to float them out there, and then we can hopefully have just a few minutes to discuss them afterwards. So moving to resources, the single best free resource, one-stop resource I've found with practical tools for developing managers into engaged coaches. And Bridget, you mentioned this word coach, and I think it is just so important. The consensus is having the relationship of coaching is actually the top learning that's happening right now in terms of what makes a good boss a good boss. Personality doesn't matter so much. You can be introverted or extroverted, more charismatic or less so, soft-spoken or not. But if you are a good coach, your team will be able to perform. So that's the number one piece that Google learned about team performance. And that good coach is the one who establishes the psychological safety within the team. Many of you may be watchers of Ted Lasso. I highly encourage and recommend the show. It's a show about a coach, a very unorthodox coach who ends up creating a lot of teamwork and camaraderie. It's on Apple TV right now with Jason Sudeikis, but it's such a fun program because he every episode is another aspect of what it looks like to be sort of an unconventional coach who cares about success, but cares about success through his people, not in spite of or controlling his people to get there. And I think that's a really great sort of current look at what that might take. So these 10 behaviors that Google found, this was over a multiple year study that they did on what makes the best teams. Only 2 out of these 10 have to do with technical skills. The other 8 have to do with what we would consider human skills. And the good news is that, Bridget, you mentioned education. Education is really important, but being a good coach is actually one of the things that is almost entirely unrelated to education level, which is really interesting. McKinsey just did this study, and they've got like 56 different, behaviors that are really meaningful for the future of work. And they have this set of attributes that, don't correlate with education. Being a coach is one of them. Anybody can be a good leader and be coached into becoming a good coach. And I just want to say, coaching isn't a skill that's developed through classroom training and reading. It's developed really by doing. Bridget, you mentioned like the old managers, and it is. It's that practice over time. And so, in other words, the best way to coach a coach on how to coach is to coach. And that sounds funny, but it's like it's one-on-one or it's in a team setting. It's learning by doing is the best way to do it. Learning that as a coach, you're not on the field, you're off the field, and you're caring about the person who's on the team or in the field on the team doing the activity, and you're doing it with restraint. And I think that's the key, because that's the thing that builds self-efficacy in our employees. Moving on, what coaches do. They set vision and expectations. They affirm relationship. They establish clear lanes, prioritize and delegate, believe and empower, provide clear feedback, stay calm in the chaos, and they take joy in others' performance. This can be, there's a lot of different ways to do coaching, but setting some simple rhythms is really helpful. Having a 5 to 10 minute daily huddle, or even just a 20-minute weekly huddle, one-on-one with someone, that amount of time and investment can make huge inroads in a relationship and in feelings of trust and support and empowerment. And more is caught than taught, right? So really, as we engage our employees, as we listen to them, we're teaching them how to coach each other and the young people that they lead. One really great thing that comes out of the, it's not a Google tool, but they also reference it in their Project Oxygen, is the GROW model. So this is one other tool that you can use. It's a very simple model to help your employees plan for and improve and move into their future confidently. It's okay if it's not work-related planning. It's not an interview. A lot of folks are like, oh, I can't, you know, what if they say their goal is to buy a house and I don't know what to do with that? As supervisors, as bosses, I think we're a little hesitant to get into those personal conversations, but it's really what employees want. There's been a lot of research that's shown that the topics that managers and leaders think are off limits, the employees do not think they're off limits. And I've seen this play out as I've had conversations with folks. And really the key is to leave it open and up to the person you're coaching to let them set the tone and let them set the topic. And if they do, it really can be a great conversation. But this model of what is your goal? What's the current reality? What are all of your options? And then what are you going to do? It puts the onus back on the person you're coaching to be the owner of their own change. And it creates self-efficacy. And this could be, like I said, work-related or not. I'm just going to run quickly through a few more tools. I think because this is being recorded, I want to get them out there. And then, and I won't talk about them very long, but here are a few more. One is the 3-question rule. When you're listening, it's scientifically proven that if you ask one question, and then if you have 2 follow-up questions after that, people believe that you're actually engaged in listening. So just use the 3-question rule. You'd be shocked and surprised at how much people start talking when you ask them a follow-up. And then from there, here's one tool that I use for myself. I recognize that, and it's cheesy, but hopefully you'll remember it because it's cheesy. I don't care that it's cheesy, but you know, we so often when we're high anxiety, it's stimulus and response, and the result is that usually, or when we act that way out of our anxiety, the result stinks. And so that self-care, that's what's so important, finding out what stinks and then handling it before you respond, right? So that's kind of the dorky, cheesy SPUR, okay, acronym here. So stimulus, pause for a second, pause, and just slow down, calm your emotions, calm your anxiety, and then uncover what's going on with you, with the long-term impact of the situation, and then reorient your response to that. That's what builds trust. When you handle the relationship first instead of the thing that's on your plate that second. Thinking about the relationship first is so key. Radical Candor is a great resource. Kim Scott, a former Googler herself, wrote this book, and it's about caring personally and challenging directly. That's another tool. 7 questions from Michael Bungay Stanier. He wrote The Coaching Habit. I won't go through these, but just to say, these are wonderful, wonderful questions. There's a lot behind these questions and why they're the right questions for a coaching conversation. My favorite coaching question is just tell me more about that. It just shows curiosity, and curiosity over judgment is always an opening conversation. It's a trust building conversation. There's so many McKinsey articles recently on helping your employees find purpose or watching them leave. Making work meaningful. There's so much on that. Perrin is a tool for evaluating social and emotional skills. They're a local company here in town, measuring attitudes, behaviors, competencies, and drivers. And it's great to discover motivations of your employees. You can have great conversations because you can understand through this tool how your employees are motivated. There's a couple of great podcasts out there. One of my favorites is Work Life with Adam Grant, an industrial organizational psychologist from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And then I've got these 7 domains. And just wrapping up, these domains are really the key to looking at how do you support your employee across each of these domains. And I'm working with a team right now to develop a toolkit on resources within the state of Colorado for each of these 7 domains and how small businesses and employers can really take tangible next steps from very easy to the most complex but what are the tangible next steps you can take and the framework you can take to really benefiting your employees along these domains. With that, I've got a whole bunch of other tools and resources. We're not going to get into them all because we're at time. But again, because this is recorded, I just want to make sure we get through them. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Deborah.
And Dan, we actually had a question earlier on that I think fits well with that. I think we had a question basically about what in addition or besides money can we do to support members? I think referring specifically to the cliff effect you referenced earlier. So maybe we'll keep an eye out for that information and be able to share it with the group. I think that was, Rajin, was that the question that you were asking? Here, you still with us? Well, in any case, we'll follow up on that, and we will send an email after this with the link to the recording, as well as information on our next series, which screen share real quick. So, also, again, to that survey, if you could just take a couple minutes really quick right now, ideally, or sometime today, to just share your feedback on this workshop. It'll be super helpful for us to be able to make sure that our content continues to be helpful and increasingly helpful. So I'm going to pop that link in right now to everybody. And just again, thank you so much, Dan, for your sharing your expertise. And thank you everyone who showed up so powerfully today to really be open and honest and vulnerable about what you're experiencing as leaders of your company and in HR positions, and really developing a community to help kind of think through these things together. Again, also really want to thank our partner organizations and give a plug for our next events that are coming up with. So next one is Thursday, September 23rd at noon, Healthcare for Any Budget, Tools to Maximize the Values of Your Health Benefits. And then again, Thursday, November 4th, Your Employees' Financial Wellness, What You Can Do Besides Give a Raise. We actually have 3 other additional workshops we'd love to bring to everybody as well. And your feedback and survey data will help us decide if that is something we can do. Again, thank you so much to the African Chamber of Commerce, the Alliance Center, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Colorado Inc., the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Pueblo, Entrepreneurship for All thrives today and tomorrow, the Sustainable Business Program of Longmont, the Pueblo West Chamber of Commerce, Rocky Mountain Microfinance Institute, Small Business Majority, Queer Business Alliance, the Urban Leadership Foundation of Colorado, and Work-Life Partnership. Thank you again so much for joining Good Business Colorado and Spur Leadership Coaching for today's workshop. And we hope to see you for the next one.
Thanks, Deborah. There is a question in the chat about what's the link to register for those.
Oh, great question. We will
I'm going to
also
paste that right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jordan. And we'll also include that in the post-event email that we're going to send, that will also include the dates for the upcoming ones, as well as some information for how to get a hold of Dan if you want to learn more about his coaching.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure. And thank you, Deborah and Jordan and GBC. Really appreciate it.
All right.